How do you avoid marrying crazy? I've been asked this question a lot, actually. In fact, I've had some people tell me that I just got lucky with respect to who I married because, after all, I grew up in a broken home. My wife grew up in a broken home. I was 19 when I got married. We immediately went into a profession where the infidelity and divorce rates are incredibly high. Out of the first 10 years of our marriage, I spent about 50% of it away from home. We went through several moves, which is considered one of the more stressful things on a marriage. By the way, the other stressful thing on a marriage is financial issues, and we had them, especially the first few years of our marriage. And yet, 25 years later, we're still in love. We're still married. We have 3 kids who so far are doing really, really good. One of them is now married. One of them is about to leave the house as they've just graduated. And the other is on track to accomplish her goals, both educationally and occupationally. So here's the real question. How does that work? Right? Because when you get married at 19 and you go into an environment where all those problems exist and you came from a background where, let's just say, the ideal marital relationships were not modeled for you, it seems like you should have failed. I mean, we literally had people at our wedding betting on whether or not we'd get divorced. In fact, some of them were just betting on how long it would take. And crazy enough, they're now divorced and we're still married and going strong. But here's the deal. It wasn't luck. Anybody that tells you that's luck is probably full of crap or just engaging in cope for their own failed relationships. The bottom line is there's actually some pretty simple rules to follow that will help you ensure that your marriage lasts. It's not a guarantee. Things can still go wrong. Bad things can happen. But I don't know. Take it from someone that's 25 years into this and really happy in my marriage. It's absolutely possible. So here's 5 things to consider. All right. The number one thing is shared values. Now, there's a lot of other categories within a marriage that are important, right? Goals, interest, attraction, right? All that's important. I'm going to talk about all of it. The reason why I say values are the most important is because it is the foundation upon which everything else is built. You can have all the shared interests and all the physical attraction in the world, but if you guys have completely different ways of viewing the world, of concepts of right and wrong, or concepts of truth, you're going to have some real problems. I guarantee you the first time you get into some sort of argument, and you will, if all of a sudden you find that the person that you're arguing with doesn't believe in objective truth, there's just your truth or my truth, what you're going to find is that they want to evade facts and reality whenever it suits them in order to get what they want. So ensuring that both of you have a firm foundation and shared values is absolutely critical, right? So for my wife and I, it was very simple. We shared the same faith. Now, what does that mean? It means there was a standard for objective truth, objective morality, and certain roles and responsibilities that each of us would play within our marriage. And what that meant is that if I violated those rules, I couldn't just dismiss them because I felt like it, or I couldn't just say, well, I'm the man of the house, so we're going to do it this way. She could appeal to those values in order to bring correction for me. I could do the same thing for her. It was a two-way street. This is really important because you got a lot of guys that'll tell you things like, well, happy wife, happy life. Just don't argue with your wife. She's always right. No, she isn't. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later as well. But understand that if you don't both have some sort of shared value system, which is objective and exists outside of the marriage, that both of you can appeal to in times of frustration or decision-making or whatnot, you're going to find out really quick that you end up just fighting about competing interests or opinions or points of view as opposed to trying to get to something that's true and concrete. So having that is not some sort of a oppressive way to control your marriage. Having that is actually a very freeing thing because when you have those shared values, when you are committed to one another, when you believe that marriage is supposed to be for life, and you're both committed to that belief, what ends up happening is that you're able to have real conversations. You're able to actually work through things in ways that might cause a different marriage to completely break apart. So I can't emphasize this enough. If you don't have a shared worldview, a shared set of values, a set of objective values that both of you can appeal to and that both of you think have legitimate authority over the way that you guys conduct yourselves, you're probably going to run into, well, a lot of problems. When you are looking for someone that you actually want to marry, you need to first go into the places and look for the sort of values that you want. But what that also means is you need to reflect those values. Because if you're looking for someone in that space, chances are they're looking for someone as well. What that means is that you have to live up to the same standards that you would like the person that you're going to marry to live up to. So if you're not worthy of her or you're not worthy of him, don't be surprised when they don't find you attractive, especially when they're placing values first, because that's someone that's actually serious about setting up a long-term relationship and building both a marriage and a family with someone that is going to be in it for the long haul. All right, number 2 is shared goals and expectations. What do I mean by this? Goals have to do with what are the things that you want to get out of life, right? What's your impression with respect to professional goals or various goals that you might have with the size of your family or where you might like to live or what kind of lifestyle that you would like, right? These are all goals to discuss. And you should really differentiate between goals which are nice to have and goals which might be deal breakers. The other thing is expectations. Now, with expectations, a big part of what I mean here is what are your actual expectations for what you're going to do as a husband or a wife, as a father or a mother? What do you expect out of the other one, and what do they expect out of you? And articulating and discussing that and being honest about it is really important. Now, I will say this about life goals. There are certain things that might seem really important early on, and maybe they are, but be careful on what things you set up as absolute deal breakers. I had a goal to go in the military, and I did, but I can tell you right now that if it had come down to a situation where my wife was just absolutely miserable in the military, it was more important for me to be married to her than it was to serve in the military. And so understand that it's fine to talk about things that are important. It's fine to talk about things that might even be really necessary as part of your overall life plan, but don't be too harsh on the deal breakers. Deal breakers should really be focused more on the values rather than goals. On the expectations side, it is so important that you have honest conversations about what you expect. Now, the values answers some of these questions, but you need to go into a little bit more detail. And honestly, it's kind of fun to do. My wife and I started talking about things like, okay, if we were to get married, what would you expect my role to be as the husband? Right? And what do I expect my role to be as the husband? So I came up with obvious things. I need to protect, I need to provide. I should be the one that is making enough money to where if you don't want to work outside the home when we start having kids or whatever it might be, you don't have to. And so I'm setting my professional aspirations around that particular goal, right? She also articulated her expectations, and lo and behold, it turns out that she wanted to work outside the home until we had kids. And then she wanted the option. She didn't want our overall lifestyle choices to be so dedicated on 2 incomes that if she wanted to stay home and really direct the management of the household and the education of the children, that she wouldn't be able to do that. And so we decided to set professional goals that would allow us to do that with the understanding that it was going to include some sacrifices. The reason why that's such an important conversation to have is because the vast majority of couples will at some time begin to have children. And when children come, that changes a lot of things. And if you haven't set the proper expectations, not just with what you would like to do with your kids, but the potential impact that will have on whatever your current lifestyle and budgeting is, you're probably going to run into problems. Because it's one thing to say, hey, it would be nice to be able to stay home with the kids. It's another thing to say, I want to do that, but I don't want there to be any lifestyle changes as a result. That's not a reasonable expectation. And that's actually one of the reasons why you talk about expectations, is that you're kind of low-key determining whether or not the other person is being reasonable with you. One of the things I want to say right off the bat is that there's a popular kind of feminist trope that wives and mothers do most of the unpaid labor. Okay, well, it might be unpaid, but it's not uncompensated. Not to mention the fact that it is an unreasonable expectation to expect the man to work 40, 50, and 60 hours a week outside the home in order to bring in all the money and then come home and equally share all the responsibilities with either the raising of children or the maintenance of the home. Not to mention the fact that I actually don't think this is a good setup. It is important for each person within the relationship to have duties and responsibilities for which they are the one that is primarily responsible and essentially in charge of it. So if I'm at work, Tina doesn't call me up and tell me how she thinks I should be doing stuff. By the same token, I don't get home and try to micromanage how Tina runs the house. We each have our respective domains. Now, again, this doesn't mean you don't have any responsibilities. When I get home, I still want to help my wife with the house. I still want to help with raising the children because they are my kids as well. But by setting up the proper expectations and articulating what we think those roles and responsibilities will be, We can actually work together toward a common goal while respecting the various domains that somebody plays the primary role versus somebody playing the secondary role. And I can't even tell you how important those conversations are, because even if you have shared values, even if you have shared goals, if you guys have vastly different views for how a household should run and what should be the roles of husband, wife, father, mother, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to butt heads a lot. And some of those may be irreconcilable differences. And the solution might be that, hey, you guys are really good friends, but you're not suited to be husband and wife. And just respect that and move on. But you will find that the more you have those discussions about expectations, the more likely you are to find someone that really does share not only your values, but an idea of what a marriage and a family will look like. And that's someone that you're going to be able to work through a lot of challenges with in order to create something pretty incredible. All right, shared interest. How important is this? Well, I think it's relatively important. Here's what I mean by that. My wife and I had established that we had shared values and we had a lot of shared expectations and some shared goals. And so the real question was there anything else that kind of united us with respect to hobbies or things we'd like to do? And what we found is there were some, right? We both had an interest in discussion and debate and talking about important issues, whether it was philosophical or historical or theological, right? We enjoyed that intellectual, back and forth with one another, which was really important because what it demonstrated is that beyond things like physical attraction or maybe just recreational hobbies, we genuinely enjoyed talking about important things with one another. And that in and of itself was an interest. Now, when it comes to more recreational things, I can tell you this. My wife has always liked to do things like jet ski, water ski. She likes some of the outdoor water sports. I never really grew up doing that, but I certainly didn't mind learning and I enjoyed it as well. Now, is that something we do all the time? No. In fact, it's somewhat far and few between, but it was something that we both enjoyed doing together. By the same token, I love studying history. Did Tina ever really get into that? Not really, but there's occasional things that she does find interesting, and so we'll watch things together. So the thing I would tell you is that as long as you have an interest with that other person that goes beyond, again, the mere physical or recreational, as long as you actually have kind of a deep intellectual interest in the other person, you're going to be shocked at what you end up liking to do later on simply because it provides you an opportunity to have a deeper relationship with that person. And the next thing you know, their interest becomes yours, your interest becomes theirs. So yes, have some shared interests, but here's one thing I want you to be wary of. A lot of times people confuse an interest or a shared hobby with an actual relationship. You actually see this causing problems sometimes with work relationships and things of that nature where two people get thrown together on a particular project, and because they have to focus so much on this shared objective, they confuse that for an actual relationship and only end up finding out later that outside of whatever the project was, they just didn't have a lot in common when it came to things like values or expectations. So avoid trying to build a relationship exclusively off of an interest. Maybe you both like going to the gym together. Maybe you both like snowboarding. Maybe you both like whatever. But if you don't have kind of an intense personal and intellectual connection with that person, I promise you the interest is not going to be enough to save the relationship or let it flourish into something that you really want. So, main takeaway from this is you don't have to have the exact same interest. But if there's literally nothing you both enjoy, that's probably a problem. Part 4, you got to be able to effectively communicate. And part of what I mean by that is you got to be able to effectively argue. Now, this is something that a lot of old, unhappy married men tell to young married men, and that is don't argue with your wife, just say you're sorry, admit you were wrong, and move on because happy wife, happy life. Yeah, that's crap. Like that is absolute garbage advice. Because what they're essentially telling you is to treat your wife like she's some sort of petulant child that has to be managed instead of engaged with. Now, on the other side of this, I talk to some guys that are like, Nick, I'm glad you can have a logical conversation with your wife. I can't have one with mine because she brings up old stuff or she changes the subject or she cries or she gets upset or whatever it is. To which I usually respond, you didn't figure that out before you married her? Like, that's pretty important, don't you think? My wife and I had conversations long before we were even dating on pretty weighty topics where we would argue back and forth. And one of the things women do when they argue with men is they're trying to figure out how good of a communicator are you? And how well do you regulate your emotions? Do you get angry? Do you yell? Do you get physically violent? So sometimes if they're pushing you on an issue when you're just friends or dating, it might be to see whether or not you can actually handle and engage in effective communication. By the same token, guys, you've also got to get into those arguments, because if you are dealing with a woman who is incapable of using logic, or who the moment you make a good point instantly shifts the discussion in some way to bring up something from the past or to shift blame or whatever it is, you might be dealing with somebody that you cannot have an effective relationship with, because I guarantee you this much, you're going to disagree at times. You're going to have some differences of opinion on some pretty important topics. And if you can't actually work through that with the goal of coming to a conclusion that both of you believe is true and worth fighting for, you're going to have issues. But if you haven't established the ability for both of you to engage in effective communication before you get married, you are setting yourself up for failure. Now, there's some guidelines with this, right? I argue with my wife differently than I might argue with one of my buddies. Right? She will probably argue with you differently than she would argue maybe with one of her friends. Understand a couple of things about just, generalities between men and women and how we view things. A lot of times my wife will come up to me and start to talk about a particular issue or problem. And for guys, our immediate inclination is usually to try to solve it. I'm going to advise you not to do that, not because problem solving is a bad thing, but because a lot of times when your wife is talking to you, she's not just venting, she's actually going through a whole list of emotions and considerations to try to figure out what exactly irritated her about a particular situation and what a potential solution could be that would also maintain valuable relationships. And so don't just sit there and say, yes, dear, and don't try to fix the problem immediately. Understand that when you sit there and listen and engage and ask questions and go through this process with her, it's something of an investigation. And if you can be a good partner in that investigation, you're actually helping her solve the first problem, which is properly identifying the issue. Once you go through all of that, then a lot of times you'll find that people are open to solutions being offered because they feel like you have properly heard them and that you're now in a position where you might be able to give valuable information that understands all of the potential issues that could be affected by engaging. So it's an important tip for guys to understand, and the earlier you get it, the better off you'll be. Ladies, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you can tell the guy up front, hey, I got an issue I need to talk about with you. I don't need you to solve it right now. I just need you to listen so I can bounce ideas off of you. You're actually putting him in the proper mindset. Believe it or not, he is capable of just kind of listening, supporting, and maybe asking engaging questions to help you figure out exactly what it is that you want to figure out. But it really helps if you put him in the proper mindset. I know sometimes there's this idea of, well, he should just know. There's a lot of things that men and women kind of think the other should just know. Stop thinking that and just verbalize it. Effectively communicate and realize that your spouse wants to help you, that they actually love you, but sometimes they just need to be teed up in the right way in order to have the sort of communication, the sort of conversation, the sort of argument that you want to have. Here's the last thing I'll say about effective communication. An argument between husband and wife should never be about defeating the other one in the argument. It should be about figuring out why there's conflict, figuring out why there's disagreement, and then discovering a pathway to where you are both on the same sheet of music so you can move forward. The goal of an argument between husband and wife is never to defeat your husband or wife. The goal is always to make the marriage stronger. If you can stay focused on that, if you can remember to talk to your wife like they're the person that you love, and ladies, if you can remember to talk to your husband in a way that he finds respectful, then you're probably going to be able to get to a conclusion that both of you can live with. Sometimes the husband's going to be wrong, and it's a good idea to say, you know what, I'm wrong, you're right, let's do it that way. Ladies, same thing applies. You will be shocked if early on in your relationship, you can honestly admit, when you might have been wrong, tell the other person they're right, and then go along with it, and not just say, okay, fine, you win, but actually commit to the solution that you've both agreed is better for your marriage. You're going to find that makes all future communication a whole lot easier. All right, here's the main takeaway. If you've never gotten in some sort of substantive argument, I don't mean yelling match, I mean just disagreement that you had to work through, then chances are you probably haven't discussed enough important topics, or you really haven't spent enough time together. Because whenever I see people that are like, oh my gosh, she's so wonderful, we never argue, we never disagree, it's like, really? Like, are you both window dressing? Like, you're honestly telling me that two passionate people don't have any disagreements about anything that could lead to a potential argument? Like, do you really think that's going to be sustained throughout your entire lifetime together? Probably not. So, look, it's not a bad thing to have those important discussions about in topics which may lead to an argument. But if you can't have a meaningful discussion about disagreements, you should see this as a huge red flag. So, seek out those discussions, seek out topics. I'm not saying you got to do it on the first date, right? But at some point, before you actually say, will you marry me to somebody, or before you say, I do to somebody, you should ask yourself, have we ever had a topic where we actually had to argue or disagree on something meaningful? Were we able to come to a logical conclusion? Were we able to work together in order to get through it and make ourselves stronger by the end of the discussion? If you haven't done that, you probably need to before you enter into a lifelong commitment with somebody. Part 5, attractiveness. Does physical attraction matter? Yes, it obviously matters. And ladies, you know it matters. And the reason why we know you know it matters is because you actually do a lot to be physically attractive because you know it matters to guys. Now, here's what I'm going to say. Right off the bat, physical attraction matters to both men and women. There's no question on that. However, men can be a little bit more susceptible to letting physical attraction cover up a mountain of red flags. And guys, that's on you, right? You have to be the one that has the intellectual maturity to realize that just because she's hot doesn't mean that's a good match. Ladies, I think you guys are actually a little bit better at this than we are, but by the same token, just because he's hot doesn't mean he's someone that could be a good husband or father. This is why I put so much emphasis on values and common goals and expectations and communication and interests before we ever get to physical attractiveness. I also believe that if you do have a physical attraction to the woman that you marry or to the guy that you're going to marry, developing yourself physically in order to remain attractive for them should not be something that stops when you get married. It should not be something that you do to secure the person and then completely give up on after you're married. I see guys talk about this sometimes where it's like, oh, the dad bod. Dude, the dad bod's not a thing, man. Get to the gym, work out. And ladies, if you wanted to make yourself pretty in order to get his attention, it's not a bad thing to continue to try to do that throughout marriage. By the same token, nobody should have to go through Herculean leaps and bounds of scientific research in order to alter themselves as they get older. Aging with grace is an important thing, and nobody should be putting themselves through something that is unhealthy or dangerous in order to try to chase a youthful look. If you've married for values, if you've married for expectations, if you have interests, if you have effective communication, what you're going to find is that person remains beautiful to you as life goes on. But by the same token, don't deny the fact that the same physical attractiveness that brought you together in the initial part of your dating or courtship is also important when you're married. It's a way of showing love and respect for the other person. I'll put it this way. I don't try to stay in shape to earn my wife's love. I already know I have that. But out of gratitude for that, and out of the fact that I really respect and love that about her, I do try to stay in shape for her. Everything physical ultimately fades. If you've fallen in love with his or her soul, mind, attitude, character, the physical stuff is going to be the easiest part of this. All right, so there's 5 points, but now I'm going to give you a bonus tip. And this is somewhat controversial, but I stand by it. Don't get physical too early on. And here's why. I have seen guys talk about how hot she was and how much they connect and how sexually compatible they were. And what ended up happening was they got physical very quick. And as a result, they chased the physical. The physical became the dominant part of the relationship. And the end result was they didn't ask the important questions about values, about goals and expectations, about interests, about effective communication. They didn't do any of that. They went straight to, that person's good looking and I want to bet them. And the next thing you know, they find themselves in a relationship, or even worse, a marriage with kids that they wish they never got into. And at that point, you've made a commitment. If you have kids, you've really made a commitment. So here's all I'm going to tell you. Don't get physical until you're actually getting married. And I know that sounds ridiculous. And I'm not saying you can't hold hands or hug or kiss or things like that, but just keep in mind, the more physical that you get before you're married, the more physical you get before you're actually committed to that person and that person exclusively because you've fallen in love with their character, their mind, their values, etc., the more you are setting yourself up for failure. Guys, you're going to fail because you're going to ignore all of the red flags associated with her ability to communicate with you, or whether or not you actually want to raise kids the same way, or even if she wants to have kids. You're going to assume so much because you were so worried about getting laid. And ladies, here's what I'm going to tell you. If the guy is pressuring you to have sex before he's willing to actually marry you, that's a red flag. And you need to recognize that no matter how great you might think he is, no matter how hot he might be, there is a values misalignment there if that is a condition of him sticking around. Because if he's not willing to stick by you through all of it, then quite frankly, don't give it up to him. Sorry, I know that's kind of a crass way to put it, but it's important. And here's the other thing I'll tell you, ladies. There's a lot of guys out there that unfortunately are being told that they should be able to go out there and run around and rack up a body count. I'm going to tell you right now that's wrong and they shouldn't do it, and that should be a red flag to you. But here's the other thing. When you do meet a guy that is the sort of guy that you think you could build a family with, a marriage with, if you jump into bed with him or you make it obvious that you're willing to jump into bed with him, that also sends him a signal about what your past might look like. And I'm telling you right now, as much as guys might talk about one thing or another thing when it comes to the physicality of a relationship, they want to know that the woman that they're going to marry is someone that holds that part, their body, their sexuality, sacred. And if there's someone that has actually reserved that for their husband, that's a turn on for guys. Not all guys, but definitely the sort of guy that you probably want to build a marriage and a family with. Definitely the sort of guy that you want to have children with. Because that's the sort of guy that has got his own emotions and his own impulses under control and recognizes that if he saves that part, if both of you save that part for the marriage, where it's something that you learn together and experience together, that's two people that really want to be committed. Now, here's the last thing I'm going to say on this. Not everybody has done it that way. Some people have looked back and said, I wish I would have done this differently. I wish I would have done that differently. Is there any hope? And the answer is yes. But you have to set new habits if you want to find somebody that's going to reflect the sort of values where you can create that marriage and family together. So if that it really is something that you regret from your past, then don't make it a part of your present or future. Make a decision to change the way that you're going to do things. In that next relationship you enter into, focus on the values, the goals and expectations, the interests and the communication. And then after you get married, you can focus on the physical. Because as much as people might like to pretend that, oh, this is just so hard to figure out and you want to make sure you're compatible, I can promise you this much, and again, it comes from experience. If you really love and respect that person for all of the reasons that we've already discussed, I can just about promise you that figuring out the physical is not only going to be really easy, but a whole lot of fun when it's in a committed relationship where the two people love each other, not just for how they look, but for how they think and who they really are. So when I list out these things, this is not me as some sort of like wise sage showing you a peer-reviewed study. I'm simply showing you what's worked based off of experience and what many people would consider to be very difficult and unideal situations. But the reason why I say this is because I wanted to give you hope. It is possible. In fact, it's incredibly possible. But it does come with a certain degree of commitment to certain values, certain ideas, and certain steps in that process. I will tell you this, it's nowhere near as hard as it's oftentimes made out to be. But when people get the priorities wrong or they focus on the wrong thing in the wrong order, that's when the trouble starts. But if you can do this, you're going to find that not only is it great for you, but it's going to be great for the person you marry. It's going to be great for the kids that you raise. They're going to grow up in a home where they know mom and dad are committed to one another, love one another, respect one another. And that creates not only a wonderful family environment for you, but it creates all the necessary components to ensure a wonderful family life for your children. You do that enough, and it works a little bit like compound interest. The next thing you know, you're part of a massive family where you can one day look at your grandkids and your great-grandkids and think, gosh, this really worked. Not just for you, but for everyone that came after you.